Chapter 1. The long goodbye. Mitchell Alexander had always been good at managing reactions. It came with the territory. Chemical engineering wasn't just equations and safety goggles. It was pressure, timing, understanding that the smallest imbalance could ripple outward if you didn't keep a steady hand. Over the years, Mitch had learned how to contain things: spills, heat, unexpected variables. Grief, however, did not respond to containment. The funeral home smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood, clean, almost clinical. Mitch stood near the front of the room, back straight out of habit more than anything else, hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for someone to hand him a clipboard. People filtered in with quiet footsteps and softer voices, offering condolences that sounded nearly identical, like variations of the same phrase passed along an assembly line. "She was a wonderful woman. She raised a good man. She'll be missed." Mitch nodded, thanked them, shook hands. It was a process. He could do processes. What he couldn't quite process was the silence between each interaction. It stretched, settled in his chest, and lingered just long enough to hurt before the next person stepped forward. "Mitchell, honey?" That voice cut straight through him. He turned before he even realized he had moved, and there she was, Mrs. Donnelly, one of his mother's lifelong friends. She wrapped him in a hug that smelled like lavender and peppermint, squeezing with the kind of sincerity that didn't ask permission. "She was so proud of you," she said softly against his shoulder. "I know," Mitch replied, his voice steady but quieter than he expected. And he did know. His mother had made sure of that. She'd never missed an opportunity to remind him that he had been her greatest investment. "I was a good investment," he told her once, years ago. When he insisted she let him start covering her bills, she had swatted his arm. "You are not an investment. You're my son." "Same thing," Mitch had said, grinning. "High yield, low risk." She'd rolled her eyes, but she'd smiled. Eventually, she had agreed to let him help, begrudgingly at first, then with a little less resistance each time. The vacations came next, the hobbies, the slow, deliberate shift from survival to enjoyment. Mitch held onto that now, the way she had finally allowed herself to rest. "She would have loved all this," Mrs. Donnelly said, gesturing around the room. "She would have complained about it first," Mitch said automatically. Mrs. Donnelly laughed, a brief, warm sound. "Of course she would have." They shared a moment, small but real. Then someone else approached, and Mitch slipped back into his role. He was speaking with a former neighbor, something about how long it had been, how the neighborhood had changed. When the room shifted, there wasn't a sound exactly. Not a gasp or a sudden silence. It was more subtle, like a change in air pressure. Mitch felt it first along the back of his neck, an inexplicable awareness that something, or someone, had entered the space. He turned, and there she was. Time did not stop. That would have been easier. Instead, it lurched forward awkwardly, like it had tripped over itself trying to catch up. Mitch didn't move immediately. He simply looked. Rachel. She stood just inside the doorway, her hand still hovering near the frame, as if she wasn't entirely sure she'd been invited. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, a little darker, styled in a way that suggested practicality over fuss. Her coat was simple, understated, but it fit her the way things always had, effortlessly. What hadn't changed was her face. Not in the ways that mattered. Her eyes found his almost instantly, and whatever composure she had managed to maintain cracked. Tears welled, bright and immediate, gathering at the edges before slipping over. She didn't try to stop them. Mitch felt something in his chest give way, not break, exactly, but shift. Like a door he had sealed long ago had just been opened without warning. He excused himself without registering what he said and stepped toward her. Rachel. Her name felt strange and familiar all at once, like a word he hadn't used in years but had never forgotten how to pronounce. "Hi," she said, and the sound of it, a little breathless, uneven, hit him harder than he expected. For a second, they simply stood there, neither quite sure what to do with the distance between them. Then she closed it, stepping forward and wrapping her arms around him. Mitch hesitated, not because he didn't want to return the hug, but because he wasn't prepared for how much he wanted to. Then his arms came up, almost of their own accord, and he held her. She was warm, solid, real. "I'm so sorry," she murmured against his coat. "Thank you," he said quietly. They stayed like that longer than was strictly appropriate for two people who had been divorced for over a decade. Mitch was aware of it somewhere in the back of his mind. The watching eyes, the potential for speculation, but none of it registered as urgent enough to act on. When they finally pulled apart, Rachel brushed at her cheeks with the heel of her hand, laughing softly at herself. "I told myself I wasn't going to cry the second I saw you," she admitted. "That lasted, what, 3 seconds?" Mitch said. "Generous," she replied. The corner of his mouth lifted before he could stop it. There it was, that rhythm. It hadn't gone anywhere. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said. Rachel's expression shifted, something more serious settling in. "Your mom would have never forgiven me if I didn't." Mitch blinked. "She would have told you that?" "Oh, multiple times," Rachel said, a hint of a smile breaking through. "Usually right before she fed me to the point of actual discomfort." That did something unexpected to Mitch's composure. She kept in touch with you, he said. Not quite a question. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it would bother you. Mitch considered it for a moment. He could have said yes. There was a version of himself, the younger one, the one still raw from goodbye, that might have felt something sharp at the idea. But standing there now, in a room filled with reminders of who his mother had been, it didn't feel like a betrayal. She liked you, he said simply. Rachel let out a small breath, half laugh, half relief. I liked her too. I'm aware, Mitch said. She mentioned it once or twice. Only once or twice? Rachel teased. I'm offended. She tried to be subtle, he deadpanned. Rachel shook her head, smiling through the remnants of tears. She was never subtle. No, Mitch agreed softly. She really wasn't. They stood in a pocket of quiet that felt separate from the rest of the room. Familiar. Easy in a way that didn't demand effort. Rachel glanced around, then back at him. Do you need anything? I mean, I know that's a vague question, but you showing up already answered it, Mitch said. The words came out before he had a chance to evaluate them, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Rachel's gaze softened. I wasn't sure how it would be. Seeing you again. Me neither, Mitch admitted. And? She asked. He thought about it. About the years in between, the quiet divorce, the way they had let each other go not out of anger but out of understanding. About the life he had built, and the one he had walked away from. It's different than I expected, he said. That's not ominous at all, Rachel replied. It's not bad, Mitch added quickly. Just unexpected. Rachel nodded slowly. Yeah, that sounds about right. Someone approached them, one of Mitch's coworkers, and he was pulled briefly into another conversation. When he turned back, Rachel was still there, waiting without hovering. That was always something she had been good at. When the room began to thin and the weight of the day settled more heavily on his shoulders, Rachel stepped closer again. Do you want some company after this? She asked. Or space? I'm also very good at space. Mitch looked at her. Really looked as if trying to reconcile the memory of who she had been with the person standing in front of him now. There were differences, of course. Time did that. But the core of her, the way she met his eyes, the quiet sincerity in her voice, that hadn't changed. He exhaled, a slow, deliberate release. Company sounds good, he said. Rachel smiled, soft and genuine. Okay. For the first time that day, Mitch felt something shift in a different direction. Not away from the grief, nothing was going to do that, but alongside it, forward. And that, he realized, was something he hadn't expected at all. Chapter 2. The space between words. The crowd thinned the way tides retreat. Slow, gradual, almost reluctant. By the time the last of the extended acquaintances had offered their condolences and stepped out into the late afternoon light, Mitchell Alexander felt like he had been standing in place for days instead of hours. When the funeral director quietly signaled that things were winding down, Mitch gave a subdued nod, as if dismissing a meeting rather than concluding something far heavier. Rachel waited. She hadn't hovered. She hadn't tried to insert herself. Instead, she busied herself in the small ways that felt natural, straightening a slightly crooked photo frame, quietly thanking one of his mother's friends, even helping gather a few stray programs left on chairs. Mitch noticed all of it, though he pretended he didn't. That had always been her way, helpful without making it about being helpful. When he finally crossed the room to her, loosening his tie as he went, she looked up with a soft, expectant expression. Are you ready to leave? She asked. Or do you still have another round of polite endurance scheduled? Polite endurance has concluded for the day, Mitch replied. I believe I passed. Rachel tilted her head thoughtfully. You were very composed. I would have given you full marks. I'll take that as a professional evaluation. Strictly observational, she said, raising her hands slightly. No grading curve involved. Mitch huffed out something close to a laugh. It surprised him. Not just the sound of it, but the ease with which it came. The day had felt so heavy, so meticulously controlled, and yet somehow, with Rachel standing there, the space around him felt lighter. Do you have somewhere in mind? She asked. Or are we improvising? Improvising usually ends with me eating something questionable at midnight, Mitch said. So maybe not. That does track with your decision-making history. Careful, he said. You were part of that history. Rachel smiled, unfazed. And I stand by my involvement. Mostly. Mostly. She paused. There was that one time with the gas station sushi. You insisted it was adventurous, Mitch pointed out. It was adventurous, she countered. It was just also ill-advised. Mitch shook his head, the memory sliding into place with surprising clarity. We both knew better. Yet we persisted, Rachel said. There's a metaphor in there somewhere. Probably several, he agreed. They walked out together into the cooling air of early evening. The sky had softened into that muted gradient between blue and gray, the kind of light that didn't demand attention but made everything seem a little calmer. Mitch inhaled, deeply this time, the first full breath he felt like he'd taken all day. Rachel tucked her hands into the pockets of her coat. There's a place not far from here, she said. A small diner. Nothing fancy, but steady. Steady sounds good, Mitch said. It always did for you, she replied lightly. He glanced at her. Is that a compliment or a diagnosis? Rachel pretended to consider it. Let's call it a long-term observation. Fair enough, he said. The diner was exactly as she had described. Unassuming, a little worn around the edges, but warm in a way that felt intentional. A bell chimed softly as they entered, and the smell of coffee and grilled food wrapped around them like something familiar. They slid into a booth by the window. For a moment, neither of them reached for the menu. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't exactly easy either. It was something in between, a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had been and everything that hadn't yet been said. Rachel broke the silence first. Your mom used to bring me here, she said, running her finger lightly along the edge of the table. When you were buried in work. Mitch blinked. You're kidding. Nope, she said. She said if I was going to stick around, I should at least know where the good pie was. That sounds like her. She also said, Rachel added, glancing up at him, that you worked too much, but you'd never listen to her unless someone else agreed. Mitch leaned back slightly, folding his arms. And did you agree? Oh, constantly, Rachel said. I just did it in a more subtle way. You mean the guilt sandwiches? They were very effective guilt sandwiches, she corrected. They were, he admitted. A waitress approached, cheerful and efficient, taking their orders, coffee for both, something simple and filling to follow. When she left, the quiet returned, but it felt less tentative now. So, Rachel said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug when it arrived, tell me about your life. Mitch let out a slow breath. There's less to tell than you'd think. I don't believe that for a second. It's mostly work, he said. Projects, deadlines, oversight. Keeps me busy. And outside of work? He hesitated. Rachel didn't press, but she didn't look away either. I make sure everything runs, he said finally. Bills are paid. The house is in order. I visit my mom. He stopped himself, the word visited catching in his throat. Rachel's expression softened. I used to visit my mom, he corrected quietly. That was a big part of it. She nodded, giving him space to sit with that. And you? He asked, shifting the focus. Did the job live up to everything you thought it would be? Rachel smiled faintly, staring into her coffee. Some of it did. Some of it didn't. That sounds about right. I got to travel, she continued. See places I'd only read about. Work on projects that mattered. It was exciting. And the parts that didn't? Mitch asked. Rachel looked up at him then, her gaze steady but thoughtful. It was lonely sometimes, she said. More than I expected. Mitch felt that land in a place he hadn't prepared for. I figured you'd have people everywhere, he said. I had colleagues, Rachel clarified. Connections. But it's not the same as. She paused, her voice softening. It's not the same as having someone who knows you before all of that. Mitch leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. You had that, he said quietly. I know, she replied. There was no accusation in her voice, just acknowledgement. And you let it go, he added, not harshly but honestly. Rachel exhaled slowly. I did. The food arrived, momentarily interrupting the conversation. They thanked the waitress, adjusting plates and utensils, but neither of them immediately began eating. I thought it was the right thing, Rachel continued after a moment, taking the job, following what I'd spent years working toward. It was the right thing, Mitch said without hesitation. Rachel studied him. You really believe that? Yes, he said. You didn't build that dream because of me. It existed long before we met. That doesn't mean leaving you behind didn't matter. Mitch held her gaze. It mattered, he said. That's why we didn't drag it out and turn it into something worse. Rachel smiled faintly, something bittersweet in it. We were very efficient about it. That's one way to describe it, Mitch said. 2 conversations, she said. 1 decision. 1 goodbye. Clean, Mitch replied. Painfully clean, Rachel corrected. Silence settled again, but this time it carried weight rather than uncertainty. Rachel picked up her fork, then set it down again. Did you ever? She began, then stopped. What? Mitch prompted gently. She hesitated, then met his eyes again. Did you ever regret it? Mitch didn't answer immediately. He thought about the years in between. The quiet apartment that became a house. The routines that filled his days. The absence that became familiar enough to ignore most of the time. Yes, he said finally. And no. Rachel's lips curved slightly. That's a frustrating answer. It's an honest one, he replied. She nodded. I think I understand that. He studied her for a moment. Did you? Rachel smiled, not wide, not carefree, but real. Every once in a while, she said. Usually at inconvenient times. Like when? Oh, you know, she said lightly. Long flights, hotel rooms, random Tuesday mornings when nothing in particular is wrong, but something feels missing. Mitch felt his chest tighten, not from discomfort, but from recognition. Yeah, he said quietly. I know that feeling. Their eyes held for a beat longer than necessary. Then Rachel leaned back slightly, picking up her fork again. Well, she said, a hint of brightness returning to her tone. At least we've established we both have excellent timing when it comes to retrospection. Mitch smiled faintly. Clearly. They started eating then, the conversation continuing in quieter, easier threads, stories that weren't heavy enough to hurt, memories that didn't reopen old wounds but acknowledged that they existed. Outside, the sky darkened fully. Inside, something else was beginning to take shape. Not defined, not named, but real enough to notice. Neither of them said it aloud. Not yet. Chapter 3. Familiar ground. Mitch hadn't expected the drive back to his house to feel so uncomplicated. There was a time when being alone in a car with Rachel meant something electric, something charged with the kind of unspoken anticipation that didn't need words to confirm it. Now, years later, the feeling was different, quieter, steadier, but no less significant. She sat in the passenger seat, one hand resting loosely against the door, the other tracing idle shapes on her knee as streetlights slipped past in intervals. If I remember correctly, she said, glancing at him, you always drive like you're transporting fragile glassware. I am transporting fragile glassware, Mitch replied. Myself. Rachel snorted softly. You used to say that in college. Consistency is underrated. Consistency is predictable, she countered. Predictable prevents accidents. Predictable also means you never take shortcuts, she said. Or risks. Mitch flicked her a brief look. You took enough risks for both of us. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned her head back, watching the road ahead. Some of them paid off, she said eventually. And some didn't? She turned her head just slightly. You already know the answer to that. Mitch didn't respond. He didn't need to. The rest of the drive settled into a comfortable quiet. Not empty, not strained, just present. When they pulled into his driveway, Rachel took a moment before opening the door, her gaze lingering on the house. It's different, she said. It's mine, Mitch replied. It wasn't a grand place. 2 stories, clean lines, functional landscaping that leaned more toward manageable than impressive. But it was solid, well-kept, intentional. Rachel stepped out, closing the door gently behind her. It suits you, she added. That sounds suspiciously like you expected something else. She smiled faintly. I didn't know what to expect. Mitch unlocked the door and stepped inside, flipping on the lights. The house greeted them with quiet stillness, the kind that came from routine rather than emptiness. Rachel paused just past the threshold. It wasn't the house itself that held her attention. It was the details. Framed photos on the wall, his mother mostly. Some of him and her together, candid moments frozen mid-laughter. A few older ones tucked among them, including a wedding photo Mitch hadn't bothered to remove. Rachel stepped closer to it. That's still there, she said softly. Mitch followed her gaze. Yeah. She smiled faintly at the image. 2 younger versions of themselves, dressed up and beaming, caught in a moment neither of them had thought would end. You looked very sure of everything, she said. I was, Mitch replied. Rachel glanced at him. That must have been nice. It was, he admitted. Neither of them suggested taking it down. Instead, Mitch gestured toward the living room. Make yourself comfortable. Rachel moved through the space slowly, not out of hesitation but out of curiosity. She traced the back of the couch with her fingertips, glanced at the bookshelves, the neatly arranged surfaces. You're still organized, she observed. I've upgraded to systematically efficient, Mitch corrected. Of course you have. She paused at the bookshelf, scanning titles. You still read technical manuals for fun? I resent the implication that they're not enjoyable, he said. Rachel pulled one free, flipping it open briefly before closing it again. I'm impressed you haven't turned this place into an extension of your office. It's not my office, Mitch said. It's where I don't have to prove anything. Rachel looked at him then. Really looked, like she was recalibrating something. That's new. Mitch shrugged. It took a while. She set the book back in place, then turned toward the kitchen. Do you still keep the mugs in the same cabinet? Second shelf, left side, Mitch said automatically. Rachel opened it and laughed. You didn't even rearrange them. Why would I? He asked. It works. It's been over a decade, she pointed out. And yet, Mitch said, you found them. Rachel shook her head, pulling down 2 mugs without needing further instruction. Some things don't change. Some things do, Mitch said. She set the mugs on the counter, then leaned against it, arms loosely crossed. Like what? Mitch hesitated, then stepped closer, resting his hands lightly on the edge of the counter opposite her. I don't fill my time just to avoid thinking anymore, he said. Rachel's expression softened. You used to. I know. You were very good at it, she added. Occupational hazard, Mitch said. Too many problems to solve. It's easier to focus outward. And now? She asked. Now I let things sit, Mitch said. Even when they're uncomfortable. Rachel studied him quietly. That sounds like growth. It sounds like I ran out of distractions, he replied dryly. She smiled at that, but there was something thoughtful behind it. You always had more going on underneath than you let people see, she said. Mitch glanced at her. You saw it. I did, Rachel said. I just didn't always know how to reach it. The honesty of that landed gently, not like a weight but like a shared understanding finally spoken out loud. Mitch pushed off the counter slightly, moving toward the coffee maker. Coffee? He asked. At this hour? Rachel said. You ordered it at the diner. That was survival, she corrected. This is optional. Mitch glanced over his shoulder. Then tea. Rachel tilted her head. You have tea now? I evolve. I'd like to see that, she said. Mitch made a quiet show of opening a cabinet and pulling down a small selection. Rachel walked closer, peering at them. You labeled them, she said, equal parts amused and impressed. It prevents confusion. It creates intimidation, she countered. I feel like I need qualifications to pick one. Just choose something, Mitch said. She selected one at random and handed it to him. Surprise me. Mitch prepared the kettle with practiced efficiency, the small domestic rhythm settling between them with surprising ease. Rachel leaned against the counter again, watching him. You seem, she began, then paused. Different, Mitch offered. Settled, she said. He considered that. That's not a bad word. No, she agreed. It's not. The kettle clicked softly as it finished heating. Mitch poured the water, handing her the mug. Their fingers brushed briefly. Neither of them pulled away too quickly. Rachel wrapped her hands around the mug, the warmth rising into her palms. Thank you. Mitch nodded. You're welcome. They moved back into the living room, settling into opposite ends of the couch at first, an instinctive distance shaped by years of separation. But the space between them didn't feel fixed. Rachel glanced around again. Your mom was here a lot, she said. Yeah, Mitch replied. She liked to check on things. Rachel smiled. She didn't trust you to relax. She was right. She usually was, Rachel said. Mitch leaned back, looking toward the framed photos on the wall. She kept things connected, he said. Even when I didn't. Rachel followed his gaze. She called me on my birthday last year, she admitted. Mitch's eyebrows lifted. Last year, Rachel nodded. She said she wasn't sure if she was supposed to, but she did it anyway. That definitely sounds like her. She told me you were doing well, Rachel added. That you'd built something solid. Mitch exhaled quietly. She liked to keep tabs. She cared, Rachel said. I know. The room settled again, but this time the quiet carried something warmer. Rachel shifted slightly, her shoulder angling a little closer to him. Not touching, just nearer. Mitch, she said after a moment. Yeah. I didn't just come because of your mom, she said. He turned his head toward her. I came because, she hesitated, searching for the right words. Because I never really stopped wondering. Mitch felt that land, clear, direct, unguarded. About what? He asked. Rachel met his eyes. About us. There it was. No deflection. No humor to soften it. Just truth. Mitch didn't answer right away. He looked at her. The familiar lines, the subtle changes, the same steady presence he had once built a life with. I wondered too, he said finally. Rachel let out a small breath, something between relief and vulnerability. Good, she said softly. They sat there, the distance between them no longer defined by years, but by choice. And slowly, without either of them announcing it, that distance began to close. Chapter 4. The weight of almost the space between them didn't close all at once. It shifted in increments, subtle, unannounced, like furniture moved in a familiar room when you weren't looking directly at it. Mitch became aware of it in the way Rachel angled toward him rather than away, in the quiet ease that replaced the earlier formality of sitting at opposite ends of the couch. He didn't comment on it. He simply adjusted, inch by inch, until the distance felt less intentional and more unnecessary. Rachel curled one leg slightly beneath her, cradling the now half-cooled mug between her hands. She studied him, not in a way that felt invasive, but like she was reacquainting herself with something she used to understand instinctively. You've got new lines, she said finally. Mitch frowned faintly. That's a very delicate way of calling me older. Rachel smiled. It's a very accurate way of saying you look like someone who's lived through things. I have lived through things, he said dry. I know, she replied softly. He met her gaze. There was something deliberate in it, no teasing, no deflection. Just truth again. Mitch leaned back slightly, one arm resting along the top of the couch. You don't look that different. Rachel raised an eyebrow. That's either a compliment or a failure to observe basic reality. It's a compliment, Mitch said. You always looked like you knew where you were going. Rachel laughed under her breath. That's funny. Why? Because I rarely did, she said. I just moved like I did. Mitch studied her for a moment. That worked for you. Sometimes, she admitted. Then quieter. Other times it just kept me from standing still long enough to question it. Mitch considered that, the words settling somewhere deeper than he expected. You don't strike me as someone who avoids questions, he said. I didn't avoid them, Rachel replied. I postponed them. That sounds like a temporary solution. It was, she said. I just made it last a very long time. Mitch let out a slow breath, glancing toward the ceiling before looking back at her. And now, Rachel tilted her head. Now I think I'm tired of postponing. The honesty in that made the room feel smaller, not claustrophobic but focused, like everything unimportant had quietly stepped out. Mitch shifted slightly, his posture less guarded than it had been earlier. That's inconvenient timing. Rachel smiled faintly. You think. My mother's wake might not be the ideal setting for major life realizations. Your mother would disagree, Rachel said immediately. She loved dramatic timing. Mitch couldn't argue with that. A small smile tugged at his mouth. She did, he admitted. Rachel watched him for a moment, her expression softening again. She used to tell me that you needed someone who could disrupt your patterns. Mitch groaned lightly. That sounds like something she would say. She wasn't wrong, Rachel added. Fragile glassware, Mitch reminded her. Rachel leaned closer, just slightly, just enough to make the shift noticeable. You're not fragile, she said. You just act like you are when things matter too much. Mitch felt that land more directly than anything she'd said so far. He didn't deflect it this time. Things do matter, he said quietly. I know, Rachel replied. There was a quiet beat between them. Then Mitch said, You mattered. Rachel didn't look away. I know, she said again, softer. The words hung there, simple, heavy, undeniable. Mitch exhaled slowly, pushing a hand through his hair. I used to think I handled it well, he said. The divorce, the letting go. You did, Rachel said gently. I handled it cleanly, he corrected. That's different. Rachel nodded, understanding already forming in her expression. I thought, Mitch continued, choosing his words carefully, that if I respected your decision completely, if I didn't fight it, didn't complicate it, then it wouldn't become something bitter. It didn't, Rachel said. We didn't hurt each other just to feel like we had a reason, right? Mitch said. But I don't think I realized that not fighting for something doesn't mean it didn't deserve to be fought for. Rachel's breath hitched, just slightly, but enough for him to notice. Mitch, she began. I'm not saying we were wrong, he said quickly. At least, not entirely. You had something you needed to do. I understood that. I still do. Rachel leaned forward a fraction more, the distance narrowing again. And you had something you needed too, she said. Mitch blinked. Like what? Permission, Rachel said. He frowned. For what? To want something that didn't make sense on paper, she said. Mitch stared at her for a moment, caught off guard. That's not. He started, then stopped. Rachel waited. That's not how I think, he said. I know, she replied. That's why you needed it. He let out a quiet, incredulous breath. From you. From yourself, Rachel corrected. I just might have been part of it. Silence settled again, but not empty. It felt like something being assembled piece by piece. Mitch looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers slightly. Did you ever think about not taking the job? He asked suddenly. Rachel didn't answer right away. Yes, she said finally. The word was quiet but firm. Mitch looked up. I thought about it more than I admitted at the time, Rachel continued. There were moments where I almost stayed. Why didn't you? He asked. Rachel's gaze held his. Because I was afraid that if I chose you over it, I'd eventually resent you for it, she said. And I didn't want that to happen. Not to us. Mitch absorbed that slowly. That's logical, he said. It was, Rachel agreed. Then softer. It just wasn't complete. Mitch leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. You mean you left out the part where you might have been happy anyway? Rachel smiled faintly. Exactly. They sat with that, both of them turning over versions of a past that no longer existed but still felt tangible. Rachel shifted, this time closing the distance fully as she turned slightly toward him on the couch. Her shoulder brushed his arm. Neither of them moved away. Mitch, she said quietly. Yeah. I don't think we were wrong people, she said. I think we were incomplete versions of ourselves trying to make permanent decisions. Mitch let out a slow breath, a hint of something like relief threading through it. That sounds about right. Rachel's fingers rested lightly against the couch between them, close enough that he could feel the presence of them without contact. And now? He asked. Rachel didn't hesitate this time. Now I think we know more, she said. About what matters. About what we actually want. Mitch glanced at her hand, then back up to her face. And what do you want? Rachel held his gaze, steady and unflinching. I want to stop treating the important things like they can wait indefinitely, she said. The room felt very still. Mitch shifted slightly, his own hand moving. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but enough that his fingers brushed hers. Rachel didn't pull back. Neither do I, he said. Their hands stayed there, touching lightly. Not a grand gesture. Not a resolution. Just acknowledgement. And this time, neither of them looked away first. Chapter 5. The Things You Don't Say. The contact of their hands lingered longer than either of them acknowledged aloud. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden shift, no rush of movement or declaration meant to define the moment before it passed. Instead, it settled into something quieter, deliberate. Their fingers rested lightly together, neither tightening nor pulling away, as if they were both agreeing, without words, to sit inside the weight of it just a little longer. Rachel was the first to move, but only slightly. She turned her hand, slow enough that Mitch could have withdrawn if he wanted to. He didn't. Their palms lined up naturally, her fingers slipping between his in a way that felt less like a decision and more like something remembered. Mitch exhaled softly. That was always easy, he said. Rachel's thumb brushed lightly against the side of his hand. Some things don't need to be relearned. No, Mitch agreed quietly. They sat like that, side by side, the television off, the house around them still. It wasn't the kind of silence people rushed to fill. It was the kind that made room, for thought, for feeling, for everything they hadn't quite figured out how to say yet. Rachel leaned her head back against the couch, turning slightly toward him. This feels dangerous, she said. Mitch glanced at her. Because it's familiar? Because it's comfortable, she corrected. Familiar I can handle. Comfortable. That's where things get complicated. Mitch's mouth curved faintly. You always did like to assign layers to things. Rachel gave a quiet laugh. You always liked to simplify them. Someone had to balance you out, Mitch said. And yet here we are, she countered gently. Still slightly out of sync. Maybe not as much as we were, Mitch said. Rachel studied him for a moment. You think so? I think, Mitch said carefully. We're asking better questions now. Rachel nodded slowly. That's true. Her gaze drifted down to their joined hands before returning to his face. So here's one, she said. What happens next? Mitch didn't answer immediately, because he knew what the easy answer was. The simple one. The one that leaned fully into the warmth of the moment without considering what came after. He could close the remaining distance. He could pull her closer. Let instinct fill in the blanks. Let nostalgia do what it does best. He didn't. Instead, he shifted slightly, turning more fully toward her. Not pulling away but not rushing forward either. We don't pretend this solves everything, he said. Rachel's expression didn't change, but something in her posture relaxed, just slightly. Good, she said. I wasn't interested in pretending. And we don't ignore what happened before, Mitch added. Or why it happened. Rachel nodded. Also good. Mitch glanced down at their hands again, then back up. But we also don't treat this like it's fragile enough to avoid. Rachel's lips curved at that. You're getting better at this. At what? Not over-engineering something that doesn't need to be over-engineered, she said. Mitch gave a small, rueful huff. I'm still engineering it. Just less aggressively. I'll take that, Rachel said. She shifted slightly closer. Not enough to crowd him, but enough that her shoulder pressed lightly into his arm. The contact felt intentional, grounding rather than tentative. Mitch, she said, her voice softer now. I don't want to rush into something just because it feels right tonight. Neither do I, he said immediately. But, she continued, I also don't want to hold back just because we're afraid of repeating the past. Mitch met her gaze directly. We're not the same people we were then. No, Rachel agreed. We're not. He considered her for a moment. The steadiness in her voice, the way she didn't shy away from the difficult parts, that hadn't changed. If anything, it had deepened. What do you want this to be? He asked. Rachel didn't hesitate as long as she had earlier that night, but she still took a moment to shape the answer. Something honest, she said. Something intentional. Not something we fall into because it's easy, and not something we walk away from because it's complicated. Mitch's grip on her hand tightened just slightly. Not enough to feel like pressure, just enough to register. That sounds specific, he said. It is, Rachel replied. Based on experience? Very much so. He nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. And you? Rachel asked. What do you want? Mitch leaned back slightly, though he didn't let go of her. His gaze drifted briefly to the far wall, to the carefully arranged photos of his mother, before returning to Rachel. I want to stop treating the important parts of my life like they're secondary to everything else, he said. Rachel watched him closely. I've spent years making sure everything worked, he continued. That things were stable, predictable, efficient. A faint smile touched his mouth. But I didn't leave much space for this. Rachel's eyes softened. For connection? For risk, Mitch corrected quietly. Rachel tilted her head. You think this is a risk? Yes, Mitch said simply. Because of me? She asked. Because of what we are when we're together, he said. The answer settled between them, not heavy, but undeniable. Rachel let out a slow breath, something thoughtful shifting behind her eyes. That's fair, she said. Neither of them spoke for a few moments after that. The room seemed to hold its breath with them, waiting to see what they'd do next. Rachel broke the silence, softly, but with intent. There's something else, she said. Mitch gave her his full attention. Okay. I didn't just wonder about us, she said. I measured things against us. Mitch blinked. What do you mean? Rachel exhaled slowly, choosing her words. Every place I went, every project I took on, every version of the life I thought I was building. At some point, I'd think about what it would have been like if you were there. Mitch's chest tightened. Not painfully, but sharply, like something long dormant suddenly coming into focus. And? He asked quietly. Rachel's lips curved in a small, uneven smile. It made everything feel incomplete in a very specific way. Mitch sat with that, absorbing it piece by piece. You didn't say anything, he said. I didn't think it was fair, Rachel replied. Not when I was the one who left. That didn't make it less real, Mitch said. No, she admitted. It didn't. He looked down again at their hands, now fully intertwined, and shook his head faintly, more at himself than at her. I got very good at not asking those questions, he said. Rachel squeezed his hand lightly. And now, Mitch met her eyes again. Now I think I've run out of good reasons not to, he said. Rachel smiled. Not brightly, not overwhelmingly, but with a quiet certainty that felt earned. That's a start, she said. Mitch nodded. Yeah, it is. The clock on the wall clicked softly into the next minute, unnoticed. Neither of them felt the need to fill the space with more words, because for the first time since she'd walked back into his life, it didn't feel like they were circling something undefined. It felt like they were standing at the edge of something they both recognized. Not a memory, not a repetition. Something new, built from understanding rather than assumption. Rachel shifted just slightly, her shoulder settling more comfortably against his arm, her hand still firmly in his. Mitch didn't move away. This time, neither of them did. Chapter 6. The morning after quiet. Morning arrived gently. It came through the windows in softened bands of light, pale gold stretching across the living room floor before creeping up the walls. Nothing about it demanded attention. It simply existed, steady, patient, inevitable. Mitch woke first. Not abruptly, not with the jolt of someone startled out of sleep, but slowly, as if something in him had decided it was time before his mind had fully caught up. For a moment he didn't move. His eyes stayed half-closed, awareness settling in layers, light, warmth, the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. And then Rachel. She was still there, curled slightly against him, her head resting against his shoulder where at some point in the night it had naturally come to settle. One of her hands still held his, though loosely now, her grip relaxed with sleep. Mitch didn't breathe differently, didn't shift. He simply noticed. The familiarity of it was what startled him most. Not the physical closeness that had come back easier than he expected, but the quiet sense of rightness. Not overwhelming, not dramatic. Just right in a way that didn't ask for justification. He turned his head slightly, careful not to wake her, studying her face in the softened light. There were small changes he hadn't noticed the night before. Faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the subtle difference in how her expression settled when she slept. Time had touched her. It hadn't taken anything essential. Mitch let out a slow breath, careful and controlled, though the instinct to move, to adjust, to create distance just to regain a sense of control, flickered briefly at the edges of his awareness. He didn't act on it. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was. Rachel stirred. Not fully awake, not yet aware of where she was, but shifting just enough that her fingers tightened slightly around his hand. There was a faint furrow in her brow, a moment of disorientation gathering. Her eyes opened a second later. For a brief moment, she didn't move. Then recognition set in. Oh, she said softly, her voice still wrapped in sleep. Mitch's mouth curved faintly. Morning. Rachel blinked once, then twice as if recalibrating. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she stayed where she was for a second longer than expected, her gaze lifting to meet his. Did we? She began, then stopped, glancing around the room. Fall asleep on the couch, Mitch supplied. Rachel nodded faintly. Yes, that. Reckless, Mitch said. Highly unplanned. Rachel huffed out a quiet laugh, though it carried a hint of embarrassment. I wasn't sure how to phrase it without sounding like I forgot basic events. You did forget, Mitch said evenly. You just woke up. That's fair. She shifted then, slowly pushing herself upright, though she didn't immediately let go of his hand. When she realized that, she glanced down at their fingers still loosely intertwined. Her thumb brushed lightly against his before she finally eased her hand away, resting it in her lap instead. Neither of them commented on it. Mitch sat up a little straighter, rolling his shoulders once. You can blame me, he said. I should have suggested something marginally more comfortable. Rachel glanced at him sideways. You mean like a bed? That would have been the conventional option. And yet here we are, she said. And yet, Mitch repeated. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, exhaling slowly. I think part of me didn't want to break the moment. Mitch considered that. Even if it meant waking up with a stiff neck? Rachel smiled faintly. Some trade-offs are acceptable. There was a pause, short but noticeable. Not uncomfortable, just aware. Rachel shifted again, pulling her legs beneath her as she turned more fully toward him. The morning light caught her face differently now, brighter, clearer. It made everything feel less sheltered than it had the night before. "Does this feel different in daylight?" she asked. Mitch didn't answer immediately. He let the question sit. Not because he didn't understand it, but because he wanted to answer it without defaulting to something safe. "A little," he said. Rachel nodded. "Same. Less insulated," Mitch added. "Exactly," she said, relief flickering briefly across her expression that he understood. He glanced toward the windows. "It's easier to be certain about things at night. Because everything narrows," Rachel said. "It's just what's in front of you." Mitch looked back at her. "And now," Rachel held his gaze. "Now everything else is back in the frame." The words weren't heavy, but they carried weight. "Work," Mitch said. Rachel nodded. "Distance, timing, history." Mitch leaned back slightly, his hands resting on his knees. "All valid variables." Rachel's smile returned, small, knowing. "You're analyzing again." "I never stopped," Mitch said. There was a quiet beat. Then Rachel sobered slightly. "I don't regret last night," she said. Mitch's response was immediate. "Neither do I." She exhaled, tension easing from her shoulders. "Good. But," Mitch added gently, "I think we both know that continuing this means making decisions we didn't have to face yesterday." Rachel nodded slowly. "We do." She stood then, stretching slightly, her movements unhurried. "Do you still make coffee like it's a precise chemical process?" she asked, her tone lighter now, though not dismissive. "Of course," Mitch said, standing as well. "There's a ratio." "I knew it," she said, heading toward the kitchen. "There's always a ratio with you." Mitch followed, watching as she moved through the space with an ease that hadn't entirely faded, even after all the years. She reached the counter, then paused, glancing back at him. "Are we okay?" she asked. The question wasn't dramatic. It was direct. Mitch met her gaze, steady and unguarded. "We're not avoiding anything," he said. Rachel's expression softened. "No, we're not. We're not pretending this fixes everything," he added. "No," she agreed. "And we're not walking away from it because it complicates things," Mitch finished. Rachel smiled, this time a little more certain. "Then we're okay." Mitch nodded once. "We're okay." She turned back to the counter, picking up one of the labeled containers and shaking her head softly at it. "You really did commit to the labeling," she said. "I commit fully," Mitch replied. "I remember," Rachel said quietly. Mitch measured the coffee, precise even now, but his focus wasn't entirely on the process. It was on the fact that she was still here, not as a memory, not as something unfinished, but as a presence that didn't feel temporary. Rachel leaned lightly against the counter, watching him again. Not analyzing, not questioning. Just watching. "Mitchell," she said after a moment, using his full name in a way she hadn't the night before. He glanced up. "Yeah." She hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of care. "We should take this seriously," she said. Mitch didn't misinterpret what she meant. "I am," he said. Rachel held his eyes for a moment longer, then nodded. "Good," she said. The coffee machine started, its low hum filling the quiet space between them. Outside, the day continued to unfold. Inside, something steadier was taking shape, less fragile than the night before, less uncertain than the past they had left behind. Not resolved, but no longer something they were willing to postpone. Chapter 7. What it takes to stay. The rhythm of the day did not wait for them to decide anything. By mid-morning, the house had shifted out of its quiet haze and back into something more structured. The coffee had been poured, breakfast had been assembled in a way that leaned far more practical than impressive, and sunlight had fully claimed the rooms. Rachel stood at the sink, rinsing out her mug, her sleeves pushed up slightly as she worked. Mitch leaned against the counter behind her, watching. Not in the way he had the night before, trying to figure something out, but in a steadier, quieter way. "You're taking over my kitchen," he said. Rachel didn't turn around. "I'm improving your workflow. It worked fine before." "It worked," she said. "This is better." Mitch folded his arms. "You've been here less than 24 hours. And already making an impact," Rachel replied easily. That pulled a small smile from him, brief but genuine. "Dangerous," he said. "Efficient," she corrected. Rachel turned then, drying her hands on a dish towel, and leaned back against the counter. The mood had shifted again, lighter than the night before, but not careless. There was an awareness now, a mutual understanding that whatever this was, it required attention. "I need to go back," she said. The words didn't land harshly. They weren't unexpected, but they carried weight. Mitch nodded once. "I figured." Rachel studied his expression. "You're not surprised." "No," he said. "You have a life, work, responsibilities." Rachel's lips curved faintly. "Still very logical. Still accurate," he replied. She pushed off the counter and took a few steps closer. "I'm not saying that as an exit line. I didn't think you were." Rachel paused in front of him, close enough now that the space between them felt intentional again. I'm saying it because it's part of the reality we're dealing with, she said. If we pretend it's not there, we're back to making incomplete decisions. Mitch nodded slowly. I agree. Rachel watched him carefully. Do you? Yes, he said, meeting her gaze without hesitation. Ignoring variables doesn't make them go away. It just makes the outcome less predictable. Rachel smiled softly. There you are. Where did I go? Mitch asked. Nowhere, she said. You just leaned into something else for a while. That something else is still here, Mitch replied. I know, Rachel said. That's why I'm still here too. There was a quiet steadiness in the exchange. No tension, no uncertainty threaded underneath, just clarity. Rachel crossed her arms lightly, not as a barrier, but as something grounding. My job doesn't disappear, she said. And neither does your life here. Mitch nodded. No, it doesn't. So, Rachel continued, we have to figure out if what we're starting is something we're willing to build across that distance, or if we're going to treat it like something temporary. Mitch's expression shifted. Not guarded, not closed, but more precise. I'm not interested in temporary, he said. Rachel's shoulders eased slightly at that. Neither am I, she said. Mitch exhaled, thoughtful. That doesn't make it simple. No, Rachel agreed. But nothing worth staying for is simple. The words lingered, not dramatic, not heavy-handed. Just true. Mitch moved away from the counter, pacing a few steps before turning back to her. It wasn't anxious movement, it was processing. You said earlier, he began, that you measured things against us. Rachel nodded. Were they close? He asked. She smiled faintly. At times. And the rest of the time? Rachel tilted her head slightly. They were good. Sometimes even great. But they weren't this. Mitch let that settle. And you? Rachel asked. Did you build anything that came close? Mitch shook his head. Not dismissively, but honestly. I built stability, he said. A life that works. But, he looked at her directly. It didn't challenge me the way you did. Rachel's expression softened, but she didn't interrupt. You didn't let things sit in the background, Mitch continued. You pushed. You questioned. You didn't let me hide behind what made sense. Rachel took a small step closer again. And that wasn't always easy. No, Mitch admitted. But it mattered. Their eyes held. And now? Rachel asked. Mitch didn't hesitate. Now I think I would have rather figured out how to handle that than go without it entirely. Rachel's breath caught softly. Not sharply, but enough to mark the moment. That's a very clear answer, she said. I'm trying not to leave things unsaid this time, Mitch replied. Rachel smiled, a little more openly now. Good. I'd prefer that. He glanced toward the window briefly, as if grounding himself in the present before continuing. If we do this, Mitch said, it means effort. Not just intention, not just feelings. Actual effort. Rachel nodded immediately. I know. It means adjusting schedules. Making time when it's inconvenient. Having conversations when they're not easy, he continued. I know, she said again, unwavering. And it means, Mitch added, that we don't default to walking away when it stops being clean. Rachel stepped closer, closing the remaining inch between them. I'm not interested in clean, she said quietly. I'm interested in staying. The words landed without hesitation. Mitch studied her, really studied her. There was no uncertainty there. No lingering doubt hidden behind careful phrasing. Just resolve. And your job? He asked. Rachel exhaled slowly. My job matters. I worked hard for it. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. I wouldn't ask you to. I know, she said. You never did. That wasn't a criticism. It was a recognition. Rachel tilted her head slightly. But I also know now that I built my life as if only one thing could matter at a time. Mitch's brow furrowed faintly. You don't think that anymore. No, she said. I think I just didn't know how to make room for more than one priority. Mitch absorbed that. And now? He asked. Rachel met his eyes, steady. Now I think I'm willing to learn, she said. The simplicity of it carried more weight than any elaborate explanation could have. Mitch nodded slowly. So am I. There was a pause, quiet, grounded, not uncertain. Rachel glanced toward the door, then back at him. I'll need to leave tomorrow, she said. Mitch nodded. Okay. I have meetings early next week, she added. Things I can't reschedule without notice. I understand. Rachel studied his face, searching for something. Disappointment, hesitation, distance. She didn't find it. What are you thinking? She asked. Mitch answered honestly. I'm thinking that for the first time, the distance feels like something to solve instead of something that ends things, he said. Rachel's expression softened, relief threading through it. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, she admitted. Mitch's mouth curved slightly. I had a feeling. Rachel laughed quietly. You're still irritatingly perceptive. Only when it matters. That's when it's most inconvenient, she said. Mitch stepped closer, close enough now that there was no ambiguity left in the space between them. So, he said, We agree this isn't temporary. We agree, Rachel said. And we're not ignoring the complications. No. And we're not walking away when it gets difficult. Rachel's answer was immediate. No. Their agreement wasn't sealed with a dramatic gesture. It didn't need one. Instead, Mitch reached for her hand again, deliberately this time, and Rachel took it without hesitation. Not out of instinct, out of choice. And this time, they both knew exactly what that choice meant. Chapter 8. The Life That Stayed. Rachel's suitcase wasn't large. Mitch noticed that immediately. It sat near the doorway the next morning, upright and unassuming, like it hadn't made a decision yet either. Rachel stood next to it, adjusting the strap of her bag, her movements steady but thoughtful. Not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate. Mitch leaned against the wall across from her, arms folded loosely, watching in that same quiet way he had fallen into over the past 2 days. Neither of them pretended this was simple. "Your ride's coming?" he asked. Rachel nodded. "In about 15 minutes. "Of course it is," Mitch said. "Right on schedule." She smiled faintly. "You approve of that. I respect consistency." Rachel tilted her head slightly. "You've gotten better about things that aren't." Mitch's mouth curved. "I'm working on it." There was a small pause, not empty, but full of everything neither of them was trying to avoid anymore. Rachel rested a hand lightly on the suitcase handle. "This would be the part," she said, "where we could make things easier on ourselves." Mitch raised an eyebrow. "By doing what?" "By minimizing," she replied, saying this was nice, meaningful, something we're glad we revisited. She gestured lightly between them. "Then we go back to our lives, file this under important but complete." Mitch didn't react immediately. He considered it, not because he was tempted, but because he understood exactly what she meant. "That would be cleaner," he said. Rachel nodded. "Yes. Also inaccurate," he added. Rachel's lips curved slowly. "Very." Mitch pushed himself off the wall and stepped closer. Not rushed, not urgent, just certain. "I don't want to make it easier," he said. Rachel met his eyes. "Neither do I." The words settled quickly, like they had already been decided before being spoken. Rachel glanced toward the window, where morning had fully taken hold now. Clear, bright, forward-moving in the way mornings always are. "I used to think," she said slowly, "that if something mattered enough, it would fit neatly into your life without forcing anything else to change." Mitch folded his hands loosely in front of him. "That would have been convenient." "It was also unrealistic," Rachel said. "Very," Mitch confirmed. She looked back at him. "Now I think, if something matters enough, it should change things." Mitch nodded once. "That makes more sense. Even if it's complicated," Rachel added. "Especially then," Mitch said. Rachel's expression softened, something steady and grounded settling into place. "I've already started looking at my schedule differently," she said. "Shorter rotations, fewer long-term assignments abroad." Mitch blinked slightly. "You move fast." Rachel shrugged lightly. "I adapt when I need to." "That's new," Mitch said. "Not entirely," she replied. "I just used to adapt away from things like this. And now," Rachel stepped closer again, closing the space between them fully. "Now I'm adapting toward it," she said. Mitch let out a slow breath, something like relief mixed with something deeper. "I've been thinking too," he said. Rachel smiled faintly. "I assumed. I can adjust my schedule," Mitch continued. "Take on projects that don't tie me to one location as tightly. Remote oversight. Travel when it makes sense." Rachel studied him. "That's not something you would have done before." "No," Mitch admitted. "But that version of me wasn't considering this." "This?" Rachel echoed. Mitch didn't hesitate. "Us," he said. The word landed cleanly, no hesitation, no softening. Rachel didn't look away. "Good," she said quietly. "Because I wasn't either." There was a brief silence, but this one didn't carry uncertainty. Carried alignment. The sound of a car pulling up outside broke into the moment. Not abruptly, but inevitably. Rachel glanced toward the door, then back at Mitch. "That's me." Mitch nodded. Neither of them moved immediately, because leaving wasn't the same as before. This wasn't a goodbye built on finality. It was something else. Rachel reached for him first this time, her hand finding his with quiet certainty. Mitch didn't just take it. He held it, firm and grounded, like something he wasn't planning to let slip away again. "This isn't the last time," she said. Mitch's response was immediate. "No, it's not." Rachel studied his face for a second longer, as if committing something to memory, not out of fear of losing it, but out of recognition. Then she smiled. Not soft, not tentative, but real in a way that carried conviction. "Good," she said. She leaned in, not quickly, not hesitantly, and kissed him. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't tentative either. It was intentional in a way neither of them would have managed years ago. A quiet understanding held inside something simple and undeniable. When they pulled back, Mitch rested his forehead lightly against hers for a brief moment. "No more postponing," he said softly. Rachel's answer came without pause. No more postponing. The driver knocked lightly at the door. Reality again. Rachel exhaled once, steadying, then stepped back. She picked up her suitcase, effortless and grounded, like she already knew she'd be carrying it back through this doorway again. "I'll call you tonight," she said. "You will," Mitch replied. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Confident. Consistent," he amended. She laughed quietly, shaking her head as she moved toward the door. Then she paused, turned, looked at him one more time. Not like she was leaving something behind, but like she was confirming something ahead. "This time," she said, "we build it while we're living it." Mitch nodded. "This time," he echoed, "we stay." Rachel held his gaze for a moment longer, then stepped out into the morning light. The door closed softly behind her. The house settled, but it didn't feel empty. Mitch stood there for a few seconds, taking in the silence. It wasn't the same silence he'd lived with for years. It wasn't absence. It was space. The kind of space that made room for something to grow. He moved to the window, watching as the car pulled away, not with that familiar heaviness of something ending, but with the steady certainty of something continuing. Mitch exhaled slowly, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. For the first time in a long time, his life didn't feel like something carefully maintained. It felt like something in motion. Not perfect, not simple, but real. And this time, that was exactly what he wanted. Epilogue. The life they built. 3 years later, Mitchell Alexander no longer measured his life in controlled outcomes or carefully managed variables. It wasn't that he had stopped being precise. He still labeled things, still planned, still approached problems like something that could be understood if you took the time to examine them properly. But his life had changed. And no amount of precision had prepared him for that change. "Mitch, she's doing it again." Rachel's voice carried from the living room, equal parts amused and exasperated. Mitch didn't look up immediately. He finished securing the lid on the container in front of him, tightening it just enough, then turned, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. "What constitutes again this time?" he asked as he stepped into the living room. Rachel gestured toward their daughter, who stood in the middle of the rug with an expression of fierce concentration. At 2 years old, Eleanor Grace Alexander had already figured out how to become the center of any moment simply by deciding it. Right now, she was attempting to stack one oversized block on top of another that was clearly not designed to support it. "She's building another questionable structure," Rachel said. "And she is committed." Mitch crouched slightly, observing. "She's testing stability thresholds," he said. Rachel looked at him. "She's too." "Exactly," Mitch replied. "This is early-stage structural experimentation." Rachel shook her head, smiling. "You're impossible." "I'm accurate," he corrected. As if responding to being discussed, Eleanor placed the final block on top of the uneven stack. It wobbled. Rachel leaned forward. "Okay, maybe." It fell. The blocks scattered across the rug. Eleanor blinked. There was a brief moment of stillness, one suspended second where both parents held their breath, waiting for the reaction. Then Eleanor sat down in the middle of the mess and clapped. Mitch straightened slightly. "Successful test." Rachel laughed, warm and full. "She gets that from you. She gets persistence from you," Mitch said. Rachel considered that. "That's fair." Eleanor grabbed another block, already starting again. The house looked different now. Not in its structure. Not in the way Mitch had carefully arranged it years before. But in its use. Toys lived openly in spaces Mitch would have once kept pristine. Small shoes rested by the door. A blanket draped over the arm of the couch. Evidence of afternoons that didn't run on schedules as neatly as his old life once had. And yet, somehow, it still worked. Better than it had before. Rachel moved past him toward the coffee table, picking up a sippy cup and setting it in its place without really thinking about it. "I have a call later," she said. "Nothing major. Just a quick check-in." Mitch nodded. "What time?" 2, she said. "I should be done before she decides nap time is a negotiation again." Mitch glanced at Eleanor, who was now very deliberately stacking blocks in a slightly more stable configuration. "She's getting better," he said. "She's getting strategic," Rachel replied. "That tracks." Rachel smiled as she watched their daughter. "I didn't expect this." Mitch tilted his head slightly. "This?" She gestured around them, not just at the room, but at everything it represented. "Staying home," she said. "Doing work when I can instead of building everything around it. I thought I'd feel like I was giving something up." Mitch stepped closer, resting a hand lightly at her back. Not to guide, not to interrupt. Just there. "And?" he asked. Rachel looked at him, her expression steady, grounded. "I feel like I chose something instead," she said. Mitch's lips curved faintly. "That sounds like you." Rachel leaned into him just slightly, a small contact, but one that had long since become second nature. "And you?" she asked. Mitch glanced down at Eleanor again, at the careful way she adjusted her blocks, brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't feel like I'm managing my life anymore," he said. "I feel like I'm living it." Rachel smiled at that. "That's new," she said. It is, Mitch replied. Neither of them had planned this. The pregnancy had come quietly. Unexpected, complicated, arriving in a way that could have easily been framed as inconvenient timing. Instead, it had become something else. Something that stripped away hesitation. Something that made every conversation they'd been having unavoidable in the best possible way. They hadn't rushed. They hadn't panicked. But they had chosen. And this time they had chosen fully. Mama! Eleanor declared suddenly, holding up a block as though it were something remarkable. Rachel turned instantly. Yes. Eleanor pointed down at her rebuilt tower. Rachel leaned forward, eyes widening in exaggerated admiration. That is impressive. Mitch crouched again, examining it with mock seriousness. Much improved structural integrity. Rachel nudged him lightly. Just say it looks good. It looks good, Mitch amended. Eleanor beamed, clearly accepting both assessments as equally valid. There was a framed photo on the wall behind them. Not one of the new ones, an older one. Mitch's mother, smiling warmly at the camera, captured in a candid moment that had long since stopped feeling like something painful to look at. Beside it, placed more recently, was a newer frame. Rachel holding Eleanor for the first time. Mitch, just behind them, his hand resting gently at Rachel's shoulder, his expression something softer than he had ever worn before. And beneath it, in carefully printed letters, Eleanor Grace Alexander, named after two women who had shaped everything that came before. Rachel crossed the room, crouching down to Eleanor's level. What do you think happens if you add one more? She asked. Eleanor looked at the tower, then at Rachel, then at Mitch. Again, she said decisively. Mitch smiled, straightening. Rachel laughed under her breath. Again it is, she agreed. Mitch stepped closer, folding into the space beside them. No hesitation, no calculation, just presence. The tower wobbled. The tower held. The tower fell. Eleanor clapped again. And this time, so did they.